Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan. Welcome back to the bunker. This time you made me watch Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. This is a request from Lone Wolf Jedi of Gotham. This is a movie that came out in 2005 and is Shane Black's directorial debut. So of course a movie that Eric likes a whole lot, and Eric's not here to help me out with the video, but he did watch this with me, and it was a good time. This is a thing I've always been a little bit curious about after seeing some of Shane Black's other films. I am now a big fan of Lethal Weapon, a thing that I never really cared that much about when I was younger. I had seen bits and pieces of like one of them, and then when Eric made me watch that and then its sequel, I really kind of fell in love with Shane Black's writing and this kind of comedy duo buddy cop thing that he does so well, and that nearly everything he does has some element of. And even Iron Man 3 to some degree with Tony Stark and the Kid. And this movie, by the way, is the reason Iron Man 3 ends up getting made the way that it does, because Shane Black wrote and directed that movie, or co-wrote and directed that movie, and the idea for him to make that was Robert Downey's. That's who he wanted after Favreau left, and that's why that movie has the kinds of sensibilities that it does. And really enlightening and eye-opening to go back and look at the first time that these guys worked together. But anyway, this is a really funny movie. I don't like it, I don't think, as well as... This is going to sound like I'm going to flip my sign red when I say this. I don't think I like this as well as any of the other Shane Black movies I've seen, but that's not saying a lot because I've liked all of them. So I guess this is technically at the bottom of the totem pole, but it's really, really even. So like, I think he just has improved as he's gone along. Well, okay, this movie is better than the Predator movie he made, I suppose, and I like that movie better than a lot of people do, but I guess this is a better movie than that. I think The Nice Guys is certainly a better movie, but also a different movie. So Shane Black tends to do a lot of the same things in a number of his movies. Like, he almost always has that buddy cop duo. He likes to set things at Christmas. He usually is writing comedies that have, a major dramatic element, but that can get kind of absurd and unlikely in a lot of the situations that happen. This, more so than anything else I've seen from him, is like that. And he likes to have a lot of gunplay, or at least characters running around with guns, and usually his movies are about violence in some way, and very often there's helicopters, and I didn't notice any helicopters in this one. I mean, this is the one Shane Black movie I've seen that maybe doesn't have helicopters, unless I missed one somewhere. But anyway, this movie, more than anything else he's made, is kind of meta, and is sitting in kind of a parody place, and he does a lot of kind of satirization of action movies in his action movies, but they typically tend to still be straight-up action movies, but they're action comedies. They're not like farces or parodies. I wouldn't put this in the farce category, but it absolutely has more of an element of parody than anything else I've seen him do. And as Eric and I were talking about while we were watching this, so this is kind of Eric's point, but he's right about it, this is kind of parodying a genre that a lot of people aren't really familiar with. This is playing around more with literary detective novels, so literary detective fiction, than it is movies. And it's got a lot of throwback to 70s thrillers. This is not a cop movie. This is like a lot of his stuff, this is a detective movie. This is about private investigators, or at least a private investigator played by Val Kilmer, with the main character, Robert Downey Jr., playing a kind of like terrible thief, an incompetent thief who is first believed on accident to be a method actor, and ends up going out for a major role because of that, and then is later thought to be an actual private investigator because the role that he's trying out for is a private investigator, which is really funny. And so it's not even really about two private investigators. It's about him playing at being a private investigator with Val Kilmer's character, who actually really is one. And it's just a lot of crazy, wacky hijinks that ensue as they're investigating this murder that they stumbled upon, and then another murder that may or may not actually be connected to that one. This is a really, really involved, complicated plot that I'm going to need a second viewing to further, to fully unravel and understand, but it is convoluted and unlikely and out there on purpose because of the kinds of novels that it's playing around with. And it's not just self-aware about it, it's fourth wall breaking about it. It is constantly kind of deconstructing and dissecting those kinds of stories and saying, look how silly and absurd and impossible this thing is that is happening, or don't you hate these tropes in movies when this sort of thing happens, and then does it anyway, but usually tries to, if not provide some kind of a real, believable in-story reason for it, kind of gets away with it because it's doing that to make fun of those things. And this is one of those things that is not, you know, as I always say, I don't care for the term review proof, but it is really difficult to call it on conveniences and contrivances, because it's about conveniences and contrivances. And so it wants to, at the same time as it's being one of these kinds of like flimsy, preposterous, like paperback detective books, and it's got a lot of those kinds of books as props in the film. It's constantly dealing with those things, and playing around with even movies that do the same kind of thing. This movie is also about Hollywood at the same time, and all of the kind of shady stuff that goes on in Hollywood. At the same time as it's playing with all those things and making fun of those things, it's also being that at the same time. So it's satirizing it, but it also is one of those, and that's a really weird line to walk. This is one of those movies that is almost certainly not for everybody, and it's one of those things that there's a real limited niche audience, especially nowadays, or even when this came out in 2005, like already pretty limited audience of people that are familiar with those kinds of books, love those kinds of books, or at least have read enough of them to get the tropes and the notions that we're making fun of here. Like, this is a really unique, one-of-a-kind thing, because who else would think to make this movie, to make fun of and play around with these particular tropes. So it's one of those things that to get a larger audience interested in it is going to have to win you over on its other sensibilities. So I don't think you necessarily have to know about those tropes to come into this, and I think it does a pretty good job of introducing them to you in the first place and making it really clear that it's that it's at least about those kinds of books. Although, like I said, I kind of halfway through needed Eric to turn to me and be like, so we're playing with the tropes of detective stories because of those kind of paperbacks, because it's also especially visually playing so much with, visually and in the soundtrack, playing so much with 70s thriller tropes, to the point where it took me a minute to even figure out if this was a period piece or not. It's not. It's set in present day, or in the 2005 present day when this came out. But it looks like a like kind of a zany 70s thriller, and so I realized that we were talking a lot about those kinds of books, but it took me a little while to realize that it was actually utilizing those tropes and ideas, kind of like an episode of The Next Generation called The Royale, that talks about, that is about a place in space where somebody has created a whole casino based on a really badly written paperback. This feels a little bit like that, except it's not. It's hard to call it intentionally badly written. It's plotted kind of like one of those kinds of things, but is intentionally a little bit smarter about it, and is constantly messing around with my expectations. Now, the question is, would I have called more of this story or not been surprised by some of the things I wasn't seeing if I had read more of these kinds of paperbacks? I don't know. It watches like it's subverting the expectations of both a general audience and an audience that's familiar with that stuff. So, just being uninitiated, it's difficult to say, but I'll give you a couple of examples and minor spoilers. Toward the beginning, we get a flashback, which becomes really funny later. By the way, I love the way this movie is structured, where it's sort of like a lot of my reviews. Downey is narrating, and he constantly interrupts himself and will say, "Oh, I forgot to tell you this part. I'm a terrible storyteller." He's also terrible at everything, which ends up being really amusing. Although, I mean, like, he's incompetent, but he's also got some ingenuity. Like, he's not a complete screw up. It's just the places where he screws up lend to a lot of the comedy in this. Like, again, minor spoilers. At one point, he ends up losing a finger. I think the most famous, Eric said the most famous scene in this movie, and it ought to be because it's great. There's a part where he accidentally kills someone. I won't tell you how that happens, but it's great. Anyway, so there's a flashback at the beginning where it's him and the girl that is the love interest through this, who is played by Michelle Monaghan, who I knew from Constantine. She is, by the way, fantastic in this. They have great chemistry, and we don't realize at the beginning of the movie that it is these two characters at the ages of like 11 or 12, 9 or 10, and it's not until way later, or a little bit later anyway, that we're told that it's them, and Downey's character kind of backtracks and is like, "Look, if you were paying attention, you'd know, but, stupid popcorn-eating audience in a movie, you got to be told by the narrator that it was actually us in this flashback, and I guess I should have told you already, but also, I want to give you a little bit of credit. You should have been paying attention." I love that stuff. I think it's really funny, and this is making fun of, again, not just tropes from like bad mystery paperbacks, but it's also, or just, mystery paperbacks in general, but also these kinds of movies, mystery thrillers. And anyway, there's this bit in that scene where where the girl is being sawed in half in a magic act, and he is, Robert Downey's character, who is played by a little kid, is pretending to saw her in half, and for a minute it looks like she's actually being sawed in half, and I thought that was actually happening, and then it turned out it wasn't. There's a lot of scenes like that where I think something is going on, and then it turns out it's something else. And a little bit later, there's a bit where Downey threatens somebody and is like, "I'm gonna, you want to take this outside?" And he gives like this really great speech, and he's gonna take this guy down. And it doesn't occur to me, even though he's already been presented as being this incompetent thief who's not good at a lot, and who is kind of self-destructive, because you always also have to have that character in a Shane Black thing. He takes the guy outside, and then the scene cuts, and then Downey is the one who's getting beaten to a bloody pulp. And it's one of those things where it's totally naturally arrived at, and I should have expected that, but I didn't. It's messing with my expectations. And then after a couple of those, I'm like, okay, this movie can't trick me anymore. When it sets up a thing that it's assuming that I know where it's going to go, I have to expect the audience. Or I have to expect the opposite, excuse me. And it continues to dupe me with things, because after it sets a pattern, stops doing that pattern, because it knows that I'm going to start picking up on it. And so it does manage to continue to surprise me all the way through, which is really super impressive. So I was saying earlier, because I'm making this video, I guess, as if I am this kind of absent-minded and scatterbrained narrator, that this movie, in order to appeal to a bigger audience, or to a wider audience, has to get you with things beyond just the parody aspects. And again, it did that for me it did not seem to appeal to a big audience, at least commercially, because it barely made its initial money back. So, I mean, I'm sure it lost money because of advertising, but it cost only $15 million to make, and it made $15 million at the box office. That's all it did. And I think globally, I think that's all it brought in. And so it was a commercial failure, and that's unfortunate. And Shane Black has had this happen with a lot of these kinds of smaller movies, and they tend to not do well financially, but be pretty critically acclaimed. And this movie is really well liked by critics, just like The Nice Guys was. And I can't find a whole lot of fault with it. I mean, maybe on, multiple viewings, and if I were to write about it, I could sit down and start breaking down stuff and decide if everything really comes together at the end. But it's playing by its own rules, and I have to take it on its own terms, and it is certainly consistent about what it is, even though what it is kind of complicated. The thing I am probably most impressed with this is Val Kilmer's character, because he is a completely, wholly unique thing that I've never seen before. He is the single most sarcastic character I have ever seen in anything, and it's a really particular brand of sarcasm. I can't really easily compare him to anybody else, and particularly the way he talks in his vernacular. It's really unusual, and it's very, very funny, and I've never seen anything quite like that. It has that buddy cop element, but that's not really the main dynamic, which kind of surprised me. Initially, when Val Kilmer's character is introduced, I thought he was going to be something more of a background character, and then it's so he's brought in because he's a real private investigator, and Downey's character is supposed to shadow him so that he can learn what it's like to be a private investigator, so that he can then play one in a movie. And incidentally, he's not actually going to be able to get that part because he's just a pawn in a larger game from these Hollywood bigwigs trying to get Colin Farrell to do a movie where he's, and Colin Farrell's not in the movie, but he's talked about where he's holding out for too much money. And that really puts this in the time and place, because Colin Farrell has not had the kind of career that everybody expected him to have after Daredevil, and even, a couple of years later at this point. And so it's really funny, the kind of time capsule this is, because I don't see Colin Farrell holding out for money for anything now. Nothing against him. I love that actor. But he's in, not big movies, but not, he's not an A-list actor. And anyway, I thought that whole thing was funny. That's just an aside. But anyway, so he's shadowing this private investigator who is this openly, I guess I wouldn't say flamboyantly gay, but he's this openly gay guy, and a lot of the comedy with his character comes from that, and his ability to tell whenever anybody is gay, and the subtle ways that he's different from other people around him because of that. And it doesn't feel like super exploitative or like we're making fun of gay people. It's just like that's part of his character, and there's just a lot of comedy mileage that comes from it. It's really well written. And anyway, they both stumble upon a murder. And because of Downey's character's incompetence, the woman that they try to save in this car, who it looks like she's drowning because she's in the trunk of this car, Downey shoots the trunk open and then actually ends up hitting her in the head, and may or may not have been the reason that she died in the first place. The corpse may have already been dead, but it's hard to say because, he shot her in the head. So now it looks like maybe they did it. And so they have to try to hide the body, and again, a lot of wacky hijinks with their, constantly, they're trying to dispose of bodies and make it look like they weren't involved in murders that they actually, were not involved in, and then having this, again, very complicated story with another person that gets killed, who is the love interest's sister, and whether or not that had anything to do with the initial murder, and it's, in another movie I would complain that this is all too ridiculous and unbelievable, but again, that's what it's about, and so it's kind of so it's really fun, and it knows that that's what it is. And but even though you have these guys who initially don't like each other and then they come to respect each other by the end, and you'd think it would be like a Riggs and Murtaugh thing from Lethal Weapon, they are, that's not even the main dynamic in the movie. It's more about this love story, and with Michelle Monaghan's character, and you see, Downey really bad at dealing with women, and not even, he'll get so drunk that he doesn't even remember what he did the night before, and he accidentally sleeps with a girl he doesn't even remember sleeping with, and you wouldn't think that those two people could ever find common ground and really get together, but they're just naturally magnetically attracted to each other, and they also there's also all of these situations that keep kind of bringing them back together, like they're fated to be together, and that dynamic could have gotten really irritating if they were constantly at each other's throats, because he is admittedly not a great person, and I shouldn't like him, but I do, and I shouldn't like their relationship, but I do, and it's very impressive what Shane Black gets away with that, and they end up being by the end an absolutely wonderful couple. This is of course a really interesting point in Robert Downey's career, because this is the first movie that he makes when he tries to start his upswing again in Hollywood, after he was gone for a while for reasons everybody understands, substance abuse and stuff. And this is 2005, Iron Man is 2008. There's a couple more movies that happen in between. So he's in Zodiac Killer, and he's in Tropic Thunder right around the same time as Iron Man. And but in this movie he looks really different from those, because it looks like he is, first of all, of course, just compared to now, he's really super young, but also he's not as built as he is later. He seems to be down a lot in weight, and it's kind of interesting that he's playing a character, and that serves this character really well, because of the mistakes he's made and what he's going through, and how much of a screw-up and self-destructive guy he is. And it's interesting that Downey took this role after the things he went through in his personal life, where he's playing a guy who is almost like an absurd, over-the-top version of what people thought of Downey of at the time. And I wonder if that was kind of like a cathartic thing for him, and if he felt like he needed to play that and get past it. Eric described this character as being like an idiot Tony Stark. He's got that same speech pattern, of course. He's got the same kind of comedic sensibilities. He talks the same way, but he's not the super genius, and he's not rich, and Tony Stark makes a lot of mistakes, and this guy makes some of the same kinds of mistakes, but this guy also makes a lot of physical mistakes. Tony Stark is not likely to accidentally murder someone, and this guy does that kind of thing. So anyway, it's just really interesting in comparison. I liked this movie a lot. I think this is really quite good. There are, comedy mileage will vary for different people. There are occasionally sexual jokes and things that I just personally didn't find that funny. I don't know that it ever goes too far for me in any place in the context of what it is. Of course, it's an explicit film. There's a lot of F-bombs. It makes fun of the fact that there's a lot of F-bombs. That's kind of great. I'll give this away. There's a minor thing. There's a thing toward the end, because again, there's that fourth wall breaking thing. And there's a thing toward the end where he apologizes to, I can't remember if this is on screen or if he says it. I think it's on screen, where there's an apology to the Midwest for all the F-bombs, and I thought that was just hysterical. But there's a lot of stuff like that I laughed at. I'm a little bit confused about the framing device. I have this with a lot of things like this, where I start to get kind of hung up on the reality of it, where did he do the same thing I did with Spawnier, where he made a movie based on real events and that's what we're watching, or is it this unreal thing that we're not really supposed to think about, where in the reality of this, it's not actually him knowing he's making a movie, even though we're hearing him talk about the fact that this is a movie. Like, how fourth wall breaking is it? Or is this supposed to be an artifact that's a product of the stuff that we watched? I'm a little bit confused about that, but I don't want to overthink it, because it is a really fun framing device, but I'm not totally sure exactly how it works in the reality of it, and maybe it would be really clear to me on a second viewing. But anyway, I am absolutely feeling this movie. I recommend it. I think it's really good, and like I said, it's not my favorite Shane Black thing, but I like a lot of his stuff pretty close to equally. So, like, if this is second to last on the list, like, these things are still, like, so close together that it almost doesn't matter to rank them. So anyway, thanks a lot for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you again next week with another request. If you would like to make a request, you can become a $15 tier, patron at patreon.com/Geekvolution. I do one of these a week, so I do it on a rotation basis. If you want to pop in and pledge one time, I'll put your request in the list, and I will get to it in a few weeks. And if you want to stay there regularly, you'll be in the rotation, and right now, with the number of patrons we have, you should get a review every 2 to 3 months. Thanks a lot for watching. Sure appreciate it. Hope you guys had a good time, and I will see you again next week. I'm Captain Logan, and bye, everybody.